explain it within the Gemara's context.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we began yesterday defining what God means when he says in the first statement, I am God your Lord. And then understanding the parameters, so to speak, of the fulfillment of the commandment of I am God your Lord, we came to a definition of the basic definition of what God is in the Jewish faith. Of course, there are endless nuances, some of which we'll touch upon as we go along. But that was the basic definition. Namely, the Rambam's definition is the primary being from which all other beings get their beingness, and he is the ultimate truth that allows for everything else to get its truth. In other words, the only reason other things exist is because he so allowed them to. And therefore, everything else that exists, their truth is conditional to his truth. As opposed to his truth is mechuyev metzius, is absolute. And in and of itself, God's truth is in and of itself, and does not rely or need on any other conditions to say, now we'll let you be. He is the ultimate condition that allows for everything else to be. We use the metaphor, the language of space, and we saw how our sages also use that language, hamakim, the omnipresent. Okay. Then we had the view of the Bahag, the Baal Halachas Gedolos, quoted in the Ramban, who doesn't disagree with the premise, at least so far as we notice, and it doesn't disagree with the definition of what God is. He only disagrees in that he's of the view that when God says, I am God your Lord, that's not a commandment, but an introduction. In that, commandments, as an a priori to commandments, there needs to be a commander. And thus, the commandment, I am me, the statement, I am me, cannot be a commandment. That needs to be the axiom upon which the commandments then follow. And thus, the Ten Commandments do not begin with, I am God your Lord. That's the introduction. The Ten Commandments begin with, thou shalt not. Well, there's 9 and not 10. Okay. Thou shalt have no other gods before me includes various different details, and you can break them down into more than one mitzvah. I don't have any other gods before me, don't bow to them, don't serve them, and you can make different categories out of that and say that you could divide that into 2 commandments to get to the number 10, but I am God your Lord is not a commandment in the Baal Halachas view.
The Mechilta, though, makes comparison 1 and 6.
There's all kinds of questions on this view.
Yeah.
As I say, in terms of proof texts from our sages, this view is difficult. But in terms of the logic of it, it would make sense. God first introduces himself and then commands. Meaning there's no thou shall in the first statement. I am God your Lord, took you out of Egypt. Where's the thou shall? It's just an introduction. So in that reading, it makes sense. But the way our sages break it down and they describe how the 10 commandments in the first of the 10 is, I am God your Lord, there's a lot of implication that statement is a mitzvah from our sages. So in the sages' interpretation, this is a bit difficult, but you see at least the 2 views. So in going forward with this discussion, if we were to... Sorry?
So I'm just thinking, it could be interpreted, maybe this is his view, is that know that I am God your Lord. In other words, that the commandment is know that I am.
According to who? The Rambam?
No, the
Bahag.
Yeah.
He says it's not a commandment. He says it's an introduction.
It's not about. I'm sorry, not about the. In argument to what he's saying.
Yeah.
It's not a commandment. One could. The other side, I guess, the other.
Yeah, that the argument is to know that.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, yeah,
but the question still remains very strong, which is, what did you know before God commanded, I am God your Lord? Mm-hmm. What did you know before that? And what's God telling you to know? In other words, you knew about him before, otherwise why are you listening to him speak? So what did you know before? And therefore, what does the words, I am God your Lord, add, making it a commandment that you hadn't fulfilled until now? That's our question now. And this is just where I was going to go.
Maybe you had other gods.
Something like that. In other words, but how exactly is that? Right? In other words, they came out of Egypt. They already knew about who this God. They knew God was. They're listening to God. God speaking. Right. What didn't they know about him that God's saying, I am God your Lord? So that's going to be where our discussion focuses. Because answering the open-ended question, what is God from a Jewish perspective, we'd be here for almost as long as Jewish history. Because there's literally endless literature on that very topic. Half of Chassidus talks about it, half of Musar not so much, but all of Hakira talks about that. And Talmudic literature, there's endless. If we were just to focus on the open-ended question, what is God? So we're going to take that question and kind of zero into what is God saying when he says, I'm God your Lord. And there we'll get the nuances in what the definition of God is, so to speak, in the fulfillment of this commandment.
As a result, how could we walk Dorim Kadoshim? How could we walk in His ways if we don't know?
They know what He is. Yeah. So we're going to get to all of that, God willing. Okay. So the question. So again, just to clarify where we're going, we want to define what the. It's almost like a legal analysis. What's the parameters of the mitzvah? I'm God, your Lord. That's defining what's God telling us when He says, I'm God, your Lord, that they didn't know before, given the Bahag's logical challenge that before God speaks, you have to know that you have to acknowledge He exists. And therefore, it's a priority to commandments, not the commandment itself. And therefore, when God says, I'm God, your Lord, as a commandment, there has to be some nuance, some added detail about who God is, that God's commanding, you should know that, or believe in that. Okay, so let's first look at the Smag. It's on page 2. A little bit out of order, maybe we should do it on Ban first and then go back. Whatever, we'll go in the order as it's printed. This comes from the Smag, the Sefer Mitzvot Gedolos. And it reads as follows. HaMitzvah Rishona, the first commandment, Lahamin, is to believe, Ki oisei shenasan haTorah b'Har Sinai, that the very one who gave the Torah at Sinai, Aidei Moshe, through Moshe, Hu Hashem Elokim, that's God our Lord. In other words, kind of what you were saying, very simplistic reading. You may have believed in many gods, and it's possible you would believe that there's one God who took you out of Egypt, and then some other God gave you the Torah. So comes the first commandment and say, no, this God that's giving you the Torah, that is one and the same God that took you out of Egypt. It's the same one. And this is why God says at the moment of the giving of the Torah, I am God your Lord, Asher Tzich who took you out of Egypt. Very simple. Don't believe in paganism, not paganism,
Idolatry?
Like Greek mythology, when you believe in more than one God, what's it called?
Pantheism.
No, polytheism. Thank you. Pantheism was in everything's God. Polytheism. Don't believe in polytheism, and there's one God who took you out of Egypt, and one God who brings the rain, and one God who took you, and one God giving you the Torah. No, it's all me.
Exclusivity here.
Exclusivity. It's a very simple commandment. In other words, the Bahag is taking it as a priori that there's a commander when you command. Fine, but who says that a commander is the one and only God? You have a commander, and he's one of the gods. It comes the commandment that says no.
You put it very well when you said last time with regard to there is, and it's all the polytheism that exists is not, because if there was polytheism, there would be pantheism, and as a result,
kind of way,
which is their philosophy, but very understandable. As a result, we have to also recognize that God is in everything, but everything is not. Everything is made by God, but that is not necessarily God.
Yeah,
there's
a nuance there. A distinction is, which we talked about a little bit, is which maybe even we'll get to when we get to Tzemach Tzedek, is that everything is nullified to God, not that everything is God.
Exactly.
It's a nuanced distinction, but we'll get to that soon.
It becomes bitul in front. Exactly.
Bitul as opposed to is.
It is exactly.
Okay, so the Smag makes it very simple. The commandment is to believe in an exclusive God, the same God that took you out of Egypt, the same God that gave you the Torah, and that's it.
Actually, identifying the importance of the divine revelation, sign it. That's to me this main point. Not only is there a God, but this one who's giving the Torah now is in fact the same.
Yes, that's the point.
Yeah.
But
exactly
revelation, but I'm building off the Bahag. Revelation is already a priority, because if there's a commandment, then there's a commander who revealed himself to give those commandments. The question is, who is that? Who is that? Who is that commander?
Exactly.
So that's what I'm saying. You might think the commander is separate from the one who created, from the one who took you out of Egypt,
right.
And the commandment comes and said that me, the commander, is the same entity, the same God that took you out of Egypt. Finished. Okay. The one kind of question that isn't answered in the Smag is, well, why didn't God say, I am God who created heaven and earth? Why does God introduce himself by saying, I am God who took you out of Egypt? If the point is to tell you that this revelation, this God that revealed himself to you and gave you Torah, is the one and only true God, then he should have said, I am God your Lord who created heaven and earth. Why did he say, I am God who took you out of Egypt? Specifically. Right? If the point is, in other words, the point this Mag is making, that this revelation of Torah comes to the one true God, would have been made better had God said, I'm God who created heaven and earth. Meaning, I'm the supreme God, so to speak. The supreme being who created everything. And now me, that's the one who's giving you the Torah. As opposed to saying, I'm God who took you out of Egypt. Clear on this one question? So now in the next text, it kind of addresses that without explicitly stating so, but it seems to cover that question as well. Is it clear?
The simple explanation is Hashem wanted to give a reason they all experienced in Mitzrayim.
Yes, that's true. Well, we'll get to that. Okay, let's say there's multiple layers to everything, but let's we have to keep our conversation focused. Otherwise, we'll be covering the entire Torah. Kol Torah Kula. All of Torah is incorporated in the first 2 diburim, so we can end with everything. But let's just focus on this. So comes the smak, Sefer Mitzvahs Ktanis, Sefer Mitzvahs Katan. It reads like this: Leda. The first commandment is to know that the one who created heaven and earth, Hu levadai moishel, he is the only ruler, ma'lamata, above and below, without ruches, and the 4 directions. Ksiv, as the verse reads, Anochi Hashem Elokeichem, God your Lord, etc. Ksiv, and the verse reads, Ve'adaita hayom, you should know today, V'shavayisi levecha, take it to heart, Ki Hashem Elokim is God as your Lord, B'shamayim, mal heavens above, V'ala'aretz b'tochas, and on the earth below, Ein oid, no other. For Darshu Chacham, our sages expound, Afil ba'avar, even in the airspace between heaven and earth, meaning everything in between. So what's this knowledge? Okay, so when God introduced himself as I am God your Lord, there's also the, even though the verse is not explicitly stated at the 10 Commandments, but there's kind of like an addendum to that statement in where God says, and you should know today and take it to heart, which is a reference to the giving of the Torah, that I'm God your Lord from heavens above and earth below. So in continuation to God's introduction where he says, I'm God your Lord, there is the element of God ruling over heavens above and earth below. So let's spell that out. And what's the commandment here? Leida, to know, Pirush means to say, La'fukim in a philosophin, to negate the view of the philosophers, Sha'amr, which said, Sha'olam, that the world, Noyeg, operates, Me'elav, on its own, B'mazoles, through constellations. Or a more modern way of saying it is, through a system of nature. Even if you believe in God, one could say, God created the world, set up a system, you press play, and it's on autopilot.
So we call that the mechanical universe there.
Mechanical universe, or just biological nature. Yeah. Things evolve, and things change, and things do, and chemicals react to each other, and biological interests clash with each other, and creating things and destroying things, and that's just the way the world operates. Even if you believe that God created. The Ein Le Manig, and it has no consistent guide, and nothing. And therefore, even these people will say, even the splitting of the sea, assuming they believed in it. The Exodus for Egypt, and all the great wonders that happened, the Mazel is built into the system through the constellations. In other words, the system is built such that when the Jews go do this and this happens. So God kind of metaphorically sitting back and watching the movie he just set in motion. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us to believe that this is absolute falsity. Okay, and indeed, God ruled the world in its entirety, but through the breath of his mouth. Metaphorically speaking, his engagement. And he took us out of Egypt, and did all those wonders. And there's the commandment: I am God your Lord, took you out of Egypt. Meaning, I am the one, I created the heaven and earth, that you know me already, because you know there's a supreme being, and you know that I'm the one talking to you. What's the commandment? The commandment to know is that I personally made it my business to take you out of Egypt. There's the commandment. And it has application, hashlachot, it has application to post Exodus from Egypt era as well, as we'll learn. And therefore we believe that it's God himself who took us out of Egypt and did all those wonders, not just on autopilot. He's quoting our sages which say that there's no one who can move his finger below, unless there's a corresponding divine energy that allows for his finger to move.
Actually, maybe not means like he hits his finger.
Or bangs his finger. The verse reads, the steps of man are guided by Hashem. It's a verse in Tehillim, which we quote we say in Hallel, right? No, we say the after it's a different pasuk. Anyway, now comes an application to post to us in our day. In other words, the statement that God says, I am God, your Lord, took you out of Egypt, in the way the Smak is saying this, and that God is saying that, yes, you know already that I created the world. In other words, we asked, what did you know about God before? So according to the Sefer Mitzvahs Gedolos, what did we know before? All we knew before was that there's a God speaking. Well, maybe there's other gods who exist. And comes a commandment that said, I'm the only God. The Smak is saying, no, you knew that there's only one God already. But you may have made the mistake of thinking that all that happens in this world is an autopilot. And even the fact that you came out of Egypt is just built into nature. And therefore comes the commandment that says, I'm God your Lord who took you out of Egypt. I got involved in taking you out of Egypt. And there's the commandment to believe that it is not just, the world is not just created and then I leave it be, but I'm continuously involved in creation, and thus I personally took you out of Egypt. Now, where does this have application to our life post-Egypt? Not just the generation that left Egypt to believe that God took them out, but for us. And not just for us to believe that once upon a time God took us out of Egypt. But what's further is that we ought to believe that God's constantly involved in creation. If He took us out of Egypt then what's He doing now for us? And there's the real belief. So let's see.
Still, all these interpretations are still cognitive.
Yes, the mitzvah is going to remain cognitive.
When we say that,
It's going to remain cognitive.
That's the commandment. The commandment is still to know.
That's correct.
To believe, to understand.
The commandment is going to remain
It's
cognitive.
Still seichel.
So far as I know, there is not a commandment. There isn't an interpretation of "I'm God your Lord" as an actual practical commandment. It's a cognitive commandment. It's correct. So now let's see how he takes this application of "I'm God your Lord" to a very, very real level. It's cognitive, but in terms of to our lives, not just to the fact that God took us out of Egypt.
In the Shema itself, from the soul, the Haftarah, right away, there we have suddenly it's a commandment by corollary that we love God with all our hearts, with all our
Yeah.
soul, everything. By corollary, we're inserting that aspect here.
Yeah, in personal involvement.
Personal, yeah.
Yes, let's see how this plays out. This is beautiful. Now, of this we can say that our sages depended on this when they said, our sages said, when a person passes on and he arrives in the world to come, here the world to come meaning the world of souls, life after death. At the time of his judgment. So he comes upstairs and they want to know how he did in life. They want to know where to put him, so to speak. So there's three things they ask him, the Gemara says there. He only quotes one of them. The other two are, did you conduct business honestly? That's the first thing they're going to ask him. I don't remember the order, I shouldn't say which one's first. But the three things that they ask there are, have you conducted business honestly? Number two, have you set time for study Torah? Asata Munna or Kavata Itul Torah? And then the third question is, and that's what he quotes here, it's Tzipisa Liyeshua, did you look forward to Mashiach's coming? Those are the three things you're asked above. Mm-hmm. So now he wants to know, where are we commanded in Torah to, why is this question? Where are we commanded to look forward to Mashiach's coming? Where does it come from? Conducting business honestly, there's a whole half of Parashat Mishpatim is that, to conduct business honestly. Setting time for Torah study, we say it in Shema. When you wake up in the morning, you lie down, teach it to your children, etc. All kinds of verses. But looking forward to Mashiach's coming, where does it say that? So now he says, Elish Mami, no, therefore we might suggest, as the Smak, Bezetoli, it comes from this commandment, I am God your Lord. How is that? In the same way, God says, I am God your Lord, took you out of Egypt. And therefore I am involved in your life to take you out of Egypt when it's time to be redeemed. The Ksiv, as the verse reads, I am God your Lord, which took you out of Egypt, etc. And therefore it follows. Because God spoke that way. God meant to say, or means to say, in the same way I want you to believe in me, that I've taken you out of Egypt, I also want you to believe that I am God your Lord, and I will take you out in the future of exile. And to say God will redeem us a second time in Egypt, the first time, the second time, God will return and collect us all. So it's a very beautiful idea. So when the Torah says, I'm God your Lord, so let's build up this way like this. The Smag says, what did you know about God before God spoke? I'm God your Lord. He says, you knew that there was a commander, because he's speaking, like the Bahag argued, but you may have made the mistake of thinking that there are more gods. And the God who he's speaking to you now is not the same God who created the world, and it's not the same God who took you out of Egypt, and it's some other God in some polytheistic kind of belief. So comes the commandment, I'm God your Lord, took you out of Egypt, it's one God. Okay. The Smak now takes it a step further and says, no, you already knew that there was one God. But you may have made the mistake of thinking that there's one God, and he set the world on autopilot, and then that's it. And now everything is up to fate, and it's on a biological mechanic train, and it happens the way it happens. Comes the Torah and says, I'm God your Lord, I took you out of Egypt. You knew already I created the world. But now I'm telling you that it's my personal involvement to watch how you're doing and to redeem you at time. And therefore, what's the application? That you should constantly know, I am looking out for you. And therefore, you ought to be waiting for redemption. If you believe that I am there to follow your life and to see how you're doing and and to make sure that the Jewish people, and you in particular, as the Torah says, Anecha Hashem Elokecha in the singular, I am God your Lord in the singular, Elokecha, not Elokechem. So I'm not just following every Jew, I'm not just following the Jewish people as a whole, but I'm following every Jew individually. And therefore it's incumbent upon you, Tzipisa Yeshua, you're looking forward to Mashiach's coming, you're waiting for God's redemption. In this faith that I am God your Lord, who took you out of Egypt. Second interpretation of this verse, of the parameters of the mitzvah, if you will.
Rabbi, Hashem considers us as a diamond. Each Jew is diamond for him.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Okay, the text here is a bit long. I want to finish the next two texts before we get to tomorrow, the Chassidus.
It's too high for him.
No, he has to go to work.
Okay. Now this is the Ramban himself. We quoted earlier the Ramban, who has his glosses on the Rambam, and earlier we quoted the Ramban, who was quoting the Bahag, who paraphrased for us the Bahag. And the Bahag is the one who said that I'm God your Lord is not a commandment because it's an a priori. And that was in the Ramban's glosses to the first mitzvah, I'm God your Lord. Here comes the Ramban's glosses to the mitzvahs lo yisaseh, to the negative commandment, don't have any other gods before me. And there he tells you his view. I'm just going to want to find the highlighted text because it's a long text and I don't have to be able to go through everything. So go to the if you go to the second paragraph. Okay, let's just read through it. We'll see how far we get. Sorry about that. Okay. It seems to me the correct way. It would seem to me, says the Ramban, that I concur with the Ramban in that I am God your Lord is to be counted as one of the commandments. Unlike the Bahag, who said that it's not a commandment, it's an axiom, it's a priori. And I have a proof from the words of our sages. The Mechilta says, why were the Ten Commandments mentioned at the beginning of the Torah? Why are those the first? Why is that the first of God's communication to us?
Why wasn't it put at the beginning of the Torah?
Sorry, the reverse. Why wasn't it put at the beginning? Why was it? Why does it begin with the whole story? Why
mention break?
Sorry, my apologies. I meant the reverse.
Yeah.
It's like Rashi's question at the beginning, but it's a different answer. Why does God give the entire introduction of the whole history? Just begin with I'm God your Lord. And just God speaks to your people. It's the whole point of Torah to give the commandments, a book of laws. The word Torah means Hayra, instruction. So just begin with the instructions. Why begin with the history? So it says it Ramban, quoting the Mechilta, the Medrash. Mashlu mashal, our sages phrase the following parable. To what this can be compared? To a person who walks into a country or a city-state. He tells them, I'm your king. The people laughs at him and say, did you do anything that you should be our king? Like, you arrived in town and you want to be king. Nice to meet you, but sorry. So what does this guy do? He builds them a fortified wall. Brings in aqueduct water. Wages their battles to protect them. Now he tells them, now I'm your king. They say to him, hein, yes indeed.
It's a good lesson in politics. You have to deliver first.
You have to deliver before you accept
That's the reverse, I guess.
It's the reverse. You promise and then you get into office.
Maybe they the promises. Yeah,
so too. God took to take the Jews out of Egypt. Split the sea. Gave them the manna. Brings them the well from Miriam, the water. He gives them a slav, provides them with the slav, the meat. Wages the battle against Amalek. And then now God says to them, am I your king? The Jews respond, hein, yes indeed.
What do you mean?
Yes indeed.
Yeah.
It's like a double expression, hein, yes indeed. That's the best way to translate into English. Literally means yes, but or indeed,
like
indeed.
In Hebrew,
Yeah, it's like indeed, but I guess a good way of saying English is yes indeed. So what's the point he's making here? So you got the point being like this, that the commandment, I'm God your Lord, is not to believe that I exist. You knew he existed. The commandment, I'm God your Lord, is to accept that belief in God as your individual sovereign. And there's the commandment. The commandment is not to know the nature of God. That is expected of you before the commandments. What's the commandment? The commandment is that you accept this God that you know about, that you believe in already. You shall accept him as your sovereign. Kabbalas hamalchus. Or as he puts it here, meaning I am God your Lord, who kabbalas malchus is to accept God's sovereignty. That is to say, to accept the faith you already have in God as your individual sovereign. And then from there flows the rest of the commandments. In other words, there are really 3 stages if you want to break it down properly. There's number 1, there's the a priori that God exists. Number 2 is accepting God as your sovereign. And number 3 is, now that he's your sovereign, here are the commandments. So it's really 3 stages. 1 is the a priori, God exists, in the definition that the Rambam gave, let's say, or whatever definition it is, but let's use the Rambam's definition we gave yesterday, knowing that he exists. Number 2 is, now this God, almost incorporating the message of the Smak, this God took you out of Egypt, he provided everything for you, and therefore you ought to accept him as your sovereign, and that's commandment number 1, accept God as your sovereign. Having now fulfilled commandment number 1 of accepting God as your sovereign, now flows the rest of the commandments. So he's not negating the Bahag's idea that the first commandment is an a priori, but he's splitting it into 2. Belief in God's existence, yes, that's not a commandment. There's a commander. If there's commandments, there's a commander. But just because there's a commander doesn't mean you have to accept him as your sovereign. Comes the first commandment that says, please accept me as your sovereign. I am your God. So it's a beautiful way of thinking of I am God your Lord. It's not God imposing upon him and screaming, I am God your Lord with fire and brimstone. You could almost read it as God requesting, can I please be your Lord?
The whole concept of Matan Torah is a result of the whole idea that we chose.
That's right. And there it's a beautiful thing. And this we see actually in the Musaf, we say, Umalchusai beratzen kiblu aleya. And his sovereign, sorry? That's right. On his sovereign,
but more brings 2 views.
Yeah. On his sovereign, we need to accept it willingly. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a dictatorship, not a real sovereign. We'll leave that out for a moment.
But in fact, it is willingly, because in the same way that
that's the point.
A man doesn't want to give a get, so his soul wants to give a get, so beat him up. But
the beautiful Ramban, yeah.
Exactly.
The Rambam, sorry.
Exactly. So the same thing with us. Our soul wanted to accept it, even though our egos didn't.
That's perhaps, but I don't want to talk about.
If that was the case.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about the mountain because that's all.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll leave the story with the mountain out for a moment because that's a separate topic. But just to recap quickly, so far what we have, and then we'll get to the next text in a moment, and we'll conclude with that, and tomorrow we'll get to the Chassidus. But we have so far as follows. We defined, by the Rambam's definition of what God is, the primary being that gives the conditions for everything to exist. From there we went to the Bahag and said, that is not a commandment. That's an a priori. And therefore we gave 3 different ways of understanding when God says, I am God your Lord, as a commandment in addition to knowing what God is. Number 1, don't think there's more than one God. One God who gave you the Torah, one God who took it of Egypt, one God who created. Know that it's all one God. One understanding of the commandment. Second understanding of the commandment is, the fact that there's one God is also obvious. The commandment here is to know that God's still involved in your life. I took you out of Egypt, and I will continue to deliver you. That's the commandment. To look forward to God's help and not to think that the world's on autopilot. And number 3 from the Smak here is, you know that about God too. The commandment here is to accept God as your sovereign, given the fact that he took you out of Egypt and did all that. Now let's get to a 4th reading, the Abarbanel. Now the Abarbanel, Shamana chapter 7 is actually a beautiful long chapter, but of course to quote the whole thing is way too long. It's very beautiful in defining what God is and using all kinds of philosophical language. But I just have one paragraph here just to highlight answering this specific question, what the commandment, I am God your Lord is, and then God willing tomorrow we'll get to the Tzemach Tzedek, the Chassidus of it. Avobat, Kavonas Harav Hagadol, the intention of the great rabbi, the Rambam, B'chol Dvarav in all of his words, B'chol Svarv in all his books, who is Shar Ikir Hardishin, the primary first faith, the mitzvah d'Hashem, the first commandment, who shenamen, is that we should believe, Shalekah Baruch Hu, that this God may be blessed. Shekvar Yadanu Shun Nimtza. We already know He exists. As the Bahag said, that's an a priori. You have to know there's a commander before there's a commandment. So what's the commandment? We ought to know Mitziusai, His being, who Yoser Rishon is the most primary, the Yoser Shalom is the most complete, Asher B'chol Matzit, that's in all of existence. Shem Mitziusai, that His being, His beingness, Eine Efshe Mitzad Atzmai, Ki Yeser Mitzoyim, His beingness is not under the condition like other. It's Eine Efshe Mitzad. It's not a possible existence, meaning it's maybe God will exist, maybe I won't exist. Like me, maybe I do exist if there's enough air and food in the room, and if there's no food in here, I won't exist. God's existence is not a efshe. It's not a possible existence like most things are. Like everything is. He is an existential being, and then He isness. So what's the Rabbi now saying? My elaborated reading of the Rambam that I gave that we explained yesterday, in this idea that God is the primary being and He's the condition under which all other things exist, I got that from the Abarbanel. And the Abarbanel says that's the commandment, to believe that, meaning to say, he says you already believe that God exists. So what did you believe in God before you thought that God was the most perfect and the most primary? So I'm suggesting perhaps the faith that a person could have without this study is a generalistic faith. There's a God. What God is, don't bother me with that. I'm not a philosopher. And comes the first commandment, says, nope, not good enough. You have to get to know God. You need to be able to understand and articulate what this God is. And what is He? He's the primary being that doesn't have other conditions to exist. He's the condition under which everything else exists, and all the rest of the things we explained in the first class. But that's the commandment. Not to leave it in this generalistic sense, I believe in God. Unless you can say what God is, then what are you believing in? In theory. And the reality is many, even from Orthodoxy, didn't believe this way. There's God, you believe God gave a Torah, but as soon as you start asking questions about what the nature of God is, we don't go there too many questions. I'm afraid of where it's going to take me. I'm not going to know the answer, and afraid of going down that route. And comes the Bible and says, well, you're failing to do the first commandment. I am God your Lord. God's introducing you. What's the first commandment? Know exactly what that means. What does it mean, I'm God your Lord? What is that? What is this God? That's the first commandment. So in a way, he doesn't say this explicitly, but perhaps what the Bible is saying is that the first commandment is to study Jewish philosophy, Hasidus, or something like that, which will get you to understand what God is. And then this
it's more of a practical mitzvah, like a
get to learn Him.
Actual.
Yeah, so it's cognitive, but this cognition takes learning. Takes learning.
Which is physical.
He doesn't say so explicitly. I'm interpreting. I'm reading this into the Barbanel because he says you already knew God exists, and the commandment is to know that He's the most perfect. He's the most, and all those definitions we gave, which means you have to go find out about these definitions. You have to study these things.
Rabbi, there's a story that tells. It gives an example of this. Two drunks are sitting in a tavern. One says, Boris, I love you. And the other one says, Tadeusz, I love you. The other one says after a moment, how can you love me? You don't know what my wishes are, my hopes, my desires, my life. How could anybody love? You don't. So it's exactly that.
Yeah.
The same thing with God. The same with human beings.
That's right.
How can you love someone, and how can we be able to? How can a child or an inferior officer understand his superior officer if he doesn't understand exactly what it is? So if we're going to do all those things, how can we do it if we don't? Our love doesn't lead to knowledge.
That's right. So, or precipitated by knowledge. So I actually want to mention that the verse says, in studying what the nature of God is, there's two elements. One is what you just mentioned. The Pasuk says so clearly. Das Elokei Avicha, know God your Lord, Vavdei B'lo Yishavim, and serve Him with the whole heart. In order to serve Him with the whole heart, one has to know Him. And this is the way the Rambam describes the fulfillment of the commandment to love God. Contemplate His creation. Chassidus talks about contemplating the nature of God's loftiness. All the point, the same thing, which is get to know God and then it leads to love. That's one element. Then there's another element, which is knowing God just for knowing Him. If you know today and take it to heart, well, there's also take it to heart, but it's not in the sense of love, of service, but just in the sense of take it seriously, that God is your Lord, He's in the heavens above and the earth below, there's no other. Understanding all that is a commandment, and it's all part of the fulfillment of I am God your Lord. That commandment. In other words, what's the commandment, I am God your Lord? To get to know God. And in addition to that, you have the plus that knowledge will lead to the next mitzvah, which is love God. But even the knowing in the abstract is already a fulfillment of the commandment. Which, if we look at this through the lens that in Torah and mitzvahs God wants a relationship with us, if that's the way we're going to look at this, the way Chassidus does, and every commandment we have is an opportunity to connect to Hashem and to deepen our relationship with Him, then the most primary of these commandments ought to be know Him and feel for Him. That's the beginning, and it's the beginning of the relationship. If a person's actions, and a person does Torah mitzvahs, that's the knowledge of what God is, and that feeling for what God wants, then his relationship is limited to his hands and feet. And where are his brains and heart in this relationship? Nowhere. So the first commandment is, get to know me. You want to have a relationship? Let's sit down and a date. Then we can see about feelings coming, and then we can think about doing things for each other. But first, let's get to know each other.
Intimate complicity.
And perhaps what the Rabbi is saying, you already know God exists, but you don't know much about Him. And comes, I am God your Lord, as a commandment. You want to fulfill the first commandment? Get to know the nature of God. And the definitions we described in the Rambam, which the Rabbi goes on to describe much, much longer here in Perek Zayin.
Yeah.
Now this is a perfect segue, one second to conclude, to tomorrow's class. Because in tomorrow we're going to get to Chassidus. And Tzimach Tzedek, this is a little foreshadowing, a little cliffhanger. Tzimach Tzedek is going to accept all of this above as a premise. Tzimach Tzedek is going to say that everything, all of the stuff, which you ought to have known, which all of the stuff that's logical about God, that is the most primary being and He's the condition under which everything else exists, all of that is also part of the axiom which you should have known before God speaks. Mm-hmm. You should have known it before. And therefore, when God says, I am God your Lord, there's some level of divinity He's introducing Himself to, He's introducing you to, that you would have not known of had you only relied on your logic. And therefore, it's not just to know all these things, that's an a priori. There's a belief that transcends the knowledge that you had until now. That's where we're going to go tomorrow. That all the things that Rambam said about what the definition of God is, that you should have known even before we started. And the commandment's now going to be to be introduced and to get to know God at a level that you wouldn't have figured out on your own. A transcendent level. And that we'll leave for tomorrow, God willing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Rabbi,